On our third wedding anniversary night, my mother-in-law stood in front of 200 wealthy investors and tried to completely humiliate me. When I spoke back and exposed her deepest secret, my husband slapped me across the face while everyone laughed. I wiped the blood from my lip and made one single phone call. "Dad, please come." They had no idea they had just declared war on a billionaire. I am Sydney, 27 years old, and I work as an art restorer. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a quiet neighborhood, I learned to value hard work over flashy appearances. My husband Tristan and his family valued the exact opposite. We were standing inside the grand ballroom of an exclusive Manhattan country club, celebrating our third anniversary. The room was dripping with crystal chandeliers and filled with 200 venture capitalists. Tristan was a tech startup founder, and tonight was his ultimate networking event. He was desperately trying to secure a massive funding round for his struggling company. I stood near the ice sculpture wearing a beautiful custom vintage white gown I had saved up for months to buy. I kept a polite smile on my face, playing the supportive wife, while Tristan ignored me to schmooze with potential investors. His family had never liked me. They thought my career in art restoration was a useless hobby and constantly reminded me that I came from nothing. I saw my mother-in-law Beverly marching toward me. She wore a heavy diamond necklace and a deeply unpleasant smirk. She held a full glass of red wine. Before I could step aside, she tripped intentionally and threw the dark red liquid directly onto my chest. The wine soaked into the delicate white fabric of my dress instantly. I gasped, looking down at the ruined silk. Beverly did not apologize. Instead, she walked right past me, stepped up onto the small stage and tapped the microphone. The soft jazz music faded, and all 200 guests turned to look at us. Beverly smiled sweetly at the crowd. "Let us raise a glass to my son Tristan," she announced, her voice echoing through the massive room. "Such a shame he had to marry a charity case with a useless art degree and no father to speak of. Look at her standing there. Her dress is as cheap as her pedigree." Soft laughter rippled through the ballroom. The investors whispered to each other, pointing at my stained dress. My face burned with humiliation, but the familiar numbness of being their punching bag vanished. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a sudden intense heat. I had spent 3 years letting them treat me like garbage because I wanted peace. I wanted a family. But looking at Beverly's smug face and seeing Tristan standing in the crowd doing absolutely nothing to defend me, I realized peace was no longer an option. I walked straight up to the stage. I took the microphone right out of Beverly's trembling hand. The room went completely silent. "My dress is custom vintage, Beverly," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly through the speakers to every corner of the room. "And it is fully paid for, unlike the diamond necklace you are wearing right now, which I know you pawned last week to pay off your massive gambling debt." The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. Beverly turned pale, her hand flying up to cover the necklace. I handed the microphone back to her, feeling a rush of vindication. Before I could walk away from the stage, heavy footsteps pounded behind me. Tristan charged forward, his face flushed red with pure rage. He grabbed my shoulder, spun me around, and swung his arm. His hand connected with my cheek in a violent, cracking slap. The impact knocked me backward, and I fell hard onto the polished marble floor. My ears rang violently. The sheer physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional betrayal tearing through my chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand completely still. I looked up at the man I had vowed to love and protect, the man I had cooked for, supported and comforted, through every failed business pitch. He stood there glaring down at me as if I were a piece of dirt on his expensive Italian leather shoes. His eyes held zero remorse. Instead, they were filled with a sick, twisted pride, as if hitting me had somehow elevated his status among these ruthless investors. "You dare humiliate my mother here," he screamed, standing over me. "You useless trash." The room erupted into shocked whispers, but then sickeningly, some of his elite friends actually laughed. Tristan adjusted his suit jacket, looking at me with pure disgust. I sat on the cold floor. I did not cry. I tasted copper in my mouth and slowly wiped the blood from my split lip. I reached into my small clutch, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had not called for help in 5 years. "Dad," I said softly into the receiver, "please come." Jamal Tristan, brother-in-law, and a high-powered wealth manager stepped out of the crowd. He was a tall African-American man who always loved mocking me. "Everyone loves a good comedy," he said, shaking his head. "Do us all a huge favor and call yourself a cheap cab while you are at it. You are ruining the aesthetic of this beautiful party." "Who are you calling?" He laughed loudly. "The mechanic who abandoned your mom 20 years ago. He cannot save you." I stared at Jamal, ignoring his cruel laughter and the judging eyes of the crowd. I slowly stood up, smoothing down my ruined dress, knowing that tonight their entire world was about to end. Jamal stepped closer, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the ugly smirk on his face. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded black plastic trash bag, and tossed it at my feet. The thick plastic hit the marble floor with a dull slap. "Pack your cheap paints and get out," Jamal ordered, his voice dripping with authority. "Tristan is filing for divorce tomorrow morning. You do not belong here. You never did." Tristan stood right behind him, rubbing his knuckles where he had just struck my face. "Do not even think about going back to the townhouse," Tristan added, his voice loud enough for the remaining investors to hear. "That property is leased under Zenith. My company pays for it. You have zero claim to that $3 million home. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it: nothing." The investors who had stayed to watch the spectacle murmured in agreement, their champagne flutes clinking as they returned to their networking. Beverly adjusted her stolen diamond necklace, looking immensely satisfied. She whispered something to Jamal and they both laughed. I looked down at the crumpled trash bag on the floor, then back up at the man I had spent 3 years supporting. Tristan looked entirely unbothered, already turning his attention to a venture capitalist across the room. He really believed he held all the power. He really believed I was just a struggling art restorer with no connections, no family, and no future. I did not pick up the bag. I turned on my heel and walked toward the grand double doors of the country club. The heavy oak doors swung open, and I stepped out into the freezing Manhattan night. A torrential downpour had started while we were inside. The freezing rain immediately soaked through the thin silk of my ruined vintage dress, mixing with the red wine stain on my chest. The valet attendants scrambled under the massive awning, rushing to retrieve luxury vehicles for the departing guests. A few society wives stood near the heating lamps, pointing at me and whispering behind their manicured hands. They expected me to break down crying. They expected me to pull out my phone and order the cheapest rideshare I could afford, just like Jamal had mocked me to do. Instead, I stood at the edge of the driveway, letting the freezing rain wash over my face, soothing the stinging heat where Tristan had struck me. I did not need to call a cab. I had made my single phone call. The sound of screeching tires cut through the heavy rain. The valets jumped back in alarm. 3 sleek black SUVs tore up the curved driveway, completely ignoring the country club traffic rules. They drove right past the line of waiting Porsches and Bentleys, coming to a sharp, synchronized halt directly in front of me, effectively blocking the entire exit. Tristan and Jamal had just walked out of the club, likely hoping to watch me shiver on the curb. They froze at the top of the stairs, staring at the formidable blockade of vehicles. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 6 heavily armed private security guards stepped out into the storm. They moved with absolute precision, wearing perfectly tailored black suits and earpieces. The sheer level of organized security was something you only saw for visiting dignitaries or foreign royalty. Tristan frowned, trying to peer through the rain to see which high-profile investor had just arrived at his event. He still had no idea. The lead guard, a massive man named Marcus, who had known me since I was a child, walked straight toward me. He did not look at Jamal. He ignored the gasps of the country club elite. Marcus snapped open a large black umbrella and held it over my head, shielding me from the downpour. He bowed his head with deep, unwavering respect. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you," Ms. Sidney Marcus said, his deep voice carrying easily over the sound of the rain. The name dropped like a bomb on the steps of the country club. Tristan went completely rigid. I actually saw Jamal drop his expensive phone. They knew that name. Everyone in that room knew the name Blackwood. I did not look back at them. I stepped forward as Marcus opened the heavy reinforced door of the center Maybach. The interior smelled of expensive leather and cedar, a scent that instantly transported me back to my childhood. I slid into the plush leather seat, and the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the noise of the storm and the shocked murmurs of my soon-to-be ex-husband. Sitting across from me in the dim ambient lighting of the luxury vehicle was Vincent Blackwood, my father. He was the ruthless billionaire CEO of Olympus Holdings. He was the titan of private equity, the very man Tristan had been obsessively trying to court for a $50 million Series B funding round to save his failing tech company. My father sat perfectly still, his tailored Italian suit impeccable, his silver cane resting against his knee. He did not immediately speak. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned my drenched clothes, the massive red wine stain ruining my dress, and finally the dark swelling bruise forming on my cheek where Tristan had slapped me. The silence in the cabin was heavy. For 5 years I had refused his money, refused his security, and refused his influence. I had wanted to build my own life as an art restorer, free from the suffocating control of the Blackwood Empire. My father had allowed it, watching from the shadows, waiting for the real world to prove him right. Now, looking at the physical evidence of my shattered marriage, he leaned forward. His voice was dangerously calm, carrying the weight of a man who could destroy entire corporations with a single signature. "Are you finally done playing the peasant, my daughter? Are you finally done playing the peasant, my daughter?" he asked, his voice entirely devoid of warmth, but heavy with absolute authority. I took a slow breath, letting the perfectly climate-controlled air of the Maybach soothe my burning lungs. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I accepted the silk handkerchief he offered and wiped the remaining streaks of red wine and blood from my chin. For 5 years, I had deliberately hidden my last name. I had introduced myself simply as Sydney, a hard-working art restorer who smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. I had walked away from the sprawling Blackwood estate at 22 to prove I could build a life with my own 2 hands. I wanted to exist entirely outside the massive shadow of Olympus Holdings. I wanted to know that people loved me for who I was, not for the billions of dollars attached to my signature. Tristan had seemed like the perfect escape. He was ambitious, charming, and completely unaware of my true lineage. He believed his own arrogant narrative that he had graciously rescued a penniless orphan from a life of obscurity. I let him believe it because it kept my father and his controlling grip at bay. I endured Beverly and her constant insults about my background because I valued peace over pride. But tonight, that illusion had been violently shattered by the sting of Tristan striking my face while his family cheered. My father reached into the small refrigerated compartment between the leather seats and pulled out a gel ice pack. He handed it to me along with a sleek black tablet. I pressed the ice to my swelling cheek, wincing slightly as the cold bit into my skin. The physical pain was grounding, pushing away the lingering shock of the evening and replacing it with a razor-sharp clarity. "I gave you 5 years of independence," Vincent continued, his gaze shifting to the rain-streaked window. "I allowed you to play with your antique canvases and pretend you were just another struggling artist trying to survive in this city. I sat back and watched while you married a mediocre man with a highly mediocre business plan. I did it because I knew the real world would eventually disappoint you. But now your husband has put his hands on a Blackwood." He turned his head, and the ambient streetlights illuminated the absolute predatory danger in his eyes. The calm exterior of the CEO vanished, revealing the ruthless titan who had dismantled countless corporations without a second thought. "I will crush him," my father stated. It was not an empty threat, it was a corporate guarantee. By tomorrow morning, Zenith will not even exist on paper. I will freeze their supply chains, pull their server hosting, and ensure that every venture capitalist in Manhattan blacklists his name permanently. He will be begging for spare change on the subway before the weekend even begins. I lowered the ice pack. The pain in my cheek was receding, replaced by a cold, calculated fury that felt wonderfully familiar. It was the exact same fury that drove my father, the very trait I had tried so hard to suppress for the sake of a normal life. I realized in that moment that normal was a luxury I could no longer afford. Tristan and his family respected nothing but power, and they had no idea I possessed the ultimate trump card. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady and hard. "I want to crush him myself." Vincent raised a thick silver eyebrow, For a long moment, the silence in the cabin was absolute, save for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers pushing the rain away. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his weathered face. It was the proud smile of a titan watching his heir finally step up to claim the throne. He reached into the leather compartment beside him and pulled out a thick, sealed dossier. He tossed it onto my lap. If you are going to destroy a man, you must first understand the fragile foundation of his arrogance, my father said. Tristan believes his tech company is a unicorn waiting to be crowned by Wall Street. The reality is far less glamorous. Zenith is bleeding cash at an uncontrollable rate. Their flagship software is full of unfixable bugs, their user acquisition cost is entirely unsustainable, and their payroll is bouncing. Tristan is completely bankrupt, Sydney. I stared at the heavy manila folder tracing the confidential stamp on the cover. If Tristan is entirely bankrupt, how is he paying for the townhouse? How is he funding the lavish country club memberships, the luxury cars, and the designer clothes for his mother? Vincent tapped the leather armrest rhythmically. That is where the story becomes truly interesting. Your husband is desperate and failing, but more importantly, his arrogant brother-in-law Jamal has been cooking the books. I frowned, opening the dossier. Jamal was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious wealth management firms in the financial district. He had spent the entire evening mocking my lack of pedigree and flaunting his elite status. He was the one who had handed me a trash bag and told me I belonged on the streets. He acted untouchable because he controlled the flow of money for powerful people. But he was about to learn the difference between managing wealth and owning the system itself. Look at page 4, my father instructed, pointing a heavy gold ring at the documents. I flipped past the executive summaries and complex corporate structures. The fourth page contained highlighted bank transfers, routing numbers, and deeply encrypted ledgers. It was a web of transactions so complex, it took me a full minute to decipher the pattern. When I did, my heart hammered against my ribs with pure adrenaline. Jamal, the prestigious wealth manager, has been funneling investor funds into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands to keep Tristan's lavish lifestyle afloat. The morning sun hit the wet pavement of Manhattan, reflecting the harsh reality of my new existence. I stepped out of the luxury hotel my father had secured for me the night before, pulling my trench coat tighter against the brisk morning wind. Despite the security detail watching me from a discreet distance, I wanted to maintain my normal routine. I craved the simplicity of a hot cup of coffee from my usual corner cafe in Chelsea. I walked up to the automated teller machine outside the bank, shivering slightly as I slipped my debit card into the slot. I typed in my PIN, intending to withdraw a small amount of cash for the day. The machine hummed for a brief second before a glaring red message flashed across the screen. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. I frowned and pulled the card out. I wiped the magnetic strip on my sleeve and inserted it again. The exact same red warning appeared. I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile banking application. The screen loaded and my stomach tightened. Every single account linked to my name showed a balance of absolute zero. The screen indicated a total administrative freeze. My personal checking account, my business operating account, even the small emergency fund I had built from restoring antique frames over the years, had been completely locked down. Tristan did not have the legal authority to freeze accounts that were solely in my name, but Jamal did. Jamal was a senior wealth manager with deep, unregulated connections across the banking sector. He had illegally pulled strings to cut off my financial oxygen. They wanted me starving. They wanted me desperate. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, snapping my attention away from the zero balances. A new text message glowed on the screen. It was from Tristan. I opened the message and stared at the image loading before my eyes. It was a photograph taken at what looked like a high-end nightclub. Tristan was in the center of the frame, holding a bottle of expensive champagne in one hand and tightly wrapping his other arm around a woman. He was kissing her passionately. I immediately recognized the blonde hair and the designer dress. It was Chloe, his sister Monica's absolute best friend. They were flaunting their betrayal, proving that their entire social circle was morally bankrupt. Beneath the photograph, Tristan had typed a short, vicious caption. Good luck surviving on the streets dropout. He was trying to break my spirit. He wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel small and easily replaced. He expected me to fall apart to panic over my empty bank accounts and weep over his blatant infidelity. Instead, a cold wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I pocketed my phone and turned my back on the ATM. I did not care about the frozen accounts. I did not care about Chloe. I only cared about my work. I hurried down the street, my pace quickening as I approached my private art restoration studio. The studio was my sanctuary, a quiet loft tucked away in a historic brick building where I spent countless hours breathing life back into forgotten masterpieces. As I rounded the corner, my heart plummeted. The heavy oak door of my studio had been completely violently smashed off its hinges. Splinters of wood littered the hallway. I stepped over the broken door frame and walked into the space. The air was thick and toxic, heavy with the sharp fumes of spilled turpentine and paint thinner. The loft was an absolute disaster zone. Tristan had not just sent someone to break in, he had sent someone to completely obliterate my livelihood. The large antique tables where I did my meticulous brushwork were flipped over. My expensive solvents and custom blended oils were poured out across the hardwood floor, staining the wood dark black. But the true devastation was the artwork. Every single canvas in the room had been viciously slashed. A 17th century portrait I had been carefully restoring for a wealthy European client was shredded into ribbons, the canvas hanging limply from the wooden stretcher. The delicate landscapes I had salvaged from water damage were stomped on and smeared with black spray paint. Tristan knew how much I loved this studio. He knew I treated every painting with deep respect. He had ordered this vandalism to send a very clear message. He was telling me that I had nothing left, that my career was a joke, and that I would inevitably have to crawl back to him on my hands and knees, begging for a roof over my head. I stood in the center of the ruined loft. The smell of the chemicals burned my nose, and the sight of the shredded history around me was heartbreaking. But I did not shed a single tear. Tristan wildly miscalculated his target. He thought he was attacking a defenseless peasant art restorer. He forgot that he had just declared war on a Blackwood. I calmly walked past the destroyed tables, my boots crunching over broken glass and snapped paintbrushes. I made my way to the very back of the studio, stopping in front of a solid exposed brick wall. This wall looked like a structural load bearing part of the historic building. The vandals had completely ignored it, focusing their rage on the fragile art instead. I reached out and pressed my hand against a specific, slightly discolored brick near the corner. The brick depressed with a soft, mechanical click. A smooth, rectangular section of the wall silently glided open, revealing a glowing biometric scanner hidden deep within the masonry. I placed my right thumb on the glass pad and leaned forward, letting the red laser sweep across my retina. A heavy, satisfying mechanical thud echoed from behind the brickwork. A massive high-tech steel safe door swung open entirely untouched and completely unnoticed by the thugs Tristan had hired. I reached into the cool, dark interior of the safe. Sitting perfectly safe on a velvet cushion was a sleek, silver hard drive. I picked it up, feeling the cool metal against my palm. Tristan thought he had destroyed my life this morning. He thought freezing my bank accounts and slashing my canvases would leave me powerless. He had absolutely no idea that this tiny silver device held the raw, unedited financial data of Jamal's massive embezzlement scheme. The offshore routing numbers, the Cayman Island wire transfers the fake holding companies used to steal millions from investors. It was all right here in my hand. Tristan wanted me to survive on the streets, but I was about to evict him from his entire reality. I slipped the hard drive into my pocket, leaving the ruined studio without a backward glance. Tristan thought he could strip me of my dignity and home. He thought the townhouse belonged to him because his failing tech company paid the bills. He was profoundly mistaken. By Sunday morning, my mother-in-law Beverly was capitalizing on my downfall. She hosted a lavish divorce celebration brunch at the townhouse, live streaming the event to thousands of high society followers. I sat in my father's Maybach watching the broadcast on a tablet. Beverly paraded through the marble foyer holding a mimosa, showing off the catered buffet. "We are so relieved," Beverly announced to her screen, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Tristan has finally taken out the trash. A new chapter without dead weight, dragging down my brilliant son." Tristan appeared in the video background laughing with Chloe, the woman he sent me photos of the day before. He truly believed he had won. I closed the live stream and signaled my driver to pull up to the curb. I stepped out of the vehicle, flanked by two men in tailored charcoal suits. They were senior litigation partners at the most feared real estate law firm in Manhattan. We walked up the limestone steps of the townhouse. I used my key and pushed the mahogany doors wide open. The lively chatter inside the grand living room came to an abrupt halt. The string quartet stopped playing. 30 heads turned to stare. Beverly nearly dropped her mimosa, her smartphone still recording. Tristan pushed past Chloe, his face darkening with rage as he marched toward the entryway. "What are you doing here?" Tristan demanded, his voice echoing. "I told you you were done. You do not live here anymore." He looked me up and down, taking in the two imposing men standing silently by my side. A smug, condescending smile spread across his face. He crossed his arms and scoffed loudly. "Did you seriously bring cheap lawyers to beg for alimony?" Tristan laughed. "Are you that desperate I told you Zenith pays the lease on this property? You have absolutely no claim to it. Get out of my house before I call the police." Beverly stepped up beside him, holding her phone higher. "Look at her," Beverly sneered, "showing up where she is not wanted. Have some dignity, Sydney. It is over." I did not flinch. I simply reached out and took a thick, legally bound document from the senior partner on my right. I held it out toward Tristan. He did not take it, so I let it drop onto the antique entry table. "I am not here for alimony, Tristan," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "And these are not divorce papers. That is a notice of foreclosure and an immediate order of eviction." Tristan stared at the document, then burst into theatrical laughter. He picked up the stack of papers and ripped them down the middle, throwing the torn pieces onto the floor. "You are completely delusional," he shouted. "You cannot evict me. Zenith does not own this house, but Zenith holds the master lease. The deed is owned by an anonymous holding company called Apex LLC. I have the signed contract. You have zero authority here." I looked at the torn papers on the floor, then back up into Tristan's arrogant face. I allowed a slow, chilling smile to form on my lips. "You own the lease through Zenith?" I agreed, my tone dangerously quiet. "And your lease payments go directly to the anonymous holding company, Apex LLC. But tell me, Tristan, did you ever bother to check who actually owns Apex LLC?" Tristan's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "Jamal set up the lease," he said defensively. "Jamal handles the real estate." "Yes, Jamal set it up," I replied, forcing Tristan to step back. "Jamal set it up 5 years ago. He needed a pristine property to make you look successful to early investors. But Jamal did not have the capital to buy a $3 million townhouse, so he came to a private holding firm that specializes in luxury real estate. He came to Apex LLC." The room was so quiet I could hear the rain hitting the windows. "I am Apex LLC," I stated, dropping the absolute truth right into the center of his lavish party. "I own the deed to this townhouse. I have owned it since the day you moved in. I let your company lease it because I wanted a quiet place to live, and I wanted to see if you could build a successful business without me holding your hand." Tristan turned pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Beverly lowered her phone, the blood draining from her face. "But you have not been successful, Tristan," I continued, my voice sharp and relentless. "Zenith is bankrupt. You have not paid me rent in 6 months. Your lease is technically in default, and your grace period expired at midnight. This is not a negotiation. You are trespassing on my property." "That is a lie," Tristan stammered. "Jamal would have known. Jamal would have told me." "Jamal is a fool who hides money behind shell corporations without doing his due diligence," I replied smoothly. "He saw an anonymous LLC willing to sign a lease, and he took it. He never looked past the corporate veil to see that the primary shareholder of Apex is Sydney Blackwood." The name Blackwood echoed in the foyer. Several wealthy guests gasped. They recognized the name of the most powerful private equity family in the country. They realized exactly who they had been mocking. Tristan shook his head violently. "No, you are a restorer. You fix old paintings. You do not have that kind of money." One of my lawyers stepped forward, pulling an intact copy of the eviction notice from his briefcase. He handed it to Tristan. "Ms. Blackwood owns the property free and clear. Your company is in severe arrears. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before we involve federal marshals to remove you by force. I looked at Tristan, whose entire world was collapsing in real time. He looked at the legal seal on the document, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. He looked at Chloe, who was already backing away. He looked at his mother, who had dropped her phone. 1 hour, Tristan, I said, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. Get out of my house. The silence shattered into a cacophony of frantic whispers and shocked gasps from the 30 high society guests holding mimosas. Tristan stood frozen over the torn pieces of the initial eviction notice, his chest heaving as the reality of my words paralyzed him. He looked like a cornered animal frantically searching the room for an escape. Beverly let out a strangled, high-pitched sound, scrambling to pick up her dropped smartphone from the polished hardwood floor, desperately trying to end the live stream. Chloe, recognizing a sinking ship, quietly stepped backward toward the grand entryway, her eyes darting toward the exit. Tristan was completely powerless, reduced to a trembling man standing in a house he had stolen. Before Tristan could formulate a coherent sentence to defend his shattered pride, Jamal pushed past the bewildered guests. He stepped forward, his massive frame deliberately blocking my view of his brother-in-law. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that radiated Wall Street dominance and extreme wealth. He squared his shoulders, casting a heavy shadow over me. Jamal was a senior partner and wealth manager, a man entirely accustomed to commanding boardrooms filled with nervous investors and corporate executives. He operated on pure intimidation, leveraging his elite financial status to force compliance from anyone he deemed beneath his social standing. He glared down at me, his eyes cold and calculating, completely ignoring the two formidable litigation partners standing silently at my flanks. He genuinely thought he could bully me into submission. Listen to me, little girl, Jamal snarled, his deep voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating register meant only for my ears. I manage billions of dollars in this city. I sit on corporate boards that control the very infrastructure of your pathetic little life. I will blacklist your social security number so fast you will not even be able to rent a cardboard box in this city. Drop this fake eviction right now, take your cheap lawyers and walk out that door before I decide to erase your entire existence. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I looked up into his furious face, studying the sharp lines of his jaw and the expensive silk tie resting against his chest. As an African-American man navigating the ruthless corridors of Wall Street, he had been forced to work twice as hard, be twice as smart, and prove his worth every single day to overcome massive systemic barriers. He had built a legitimate hard-won empire of prestige and financial power through sheer grit and intelligence. Yet looking at him now acting as the aggressive attack dog for a mediocre privileged man-child like Tristan, I felt a wave of profound disgust. Jamal was willingly throwing away his immaculate career, risking decades of grueling sacrifice, all to cover up the incompetent financial sins of his arrogant brother-in-law. He had cooked the books to keep Tristan clothed in designer brands, and now he was threatening me to protect a hollow, fragile lie. You are making a terrible mistake, Jamal, I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of the panicking guests whispering behind us. You think you are protecting your family status, but you are tying a heavy anchor to your own neck. You are sacrificing your entire future for a man who would never do the same for you. Jamal let out a harsh, dismissive scoff, adjusting his expensive suit jacket with a quick, arrogant jerk of his hands. Do not lecture me on mistakes, Sydney. You have absolutely no idea how the real financial world operates. You think a piece of paper from a random holding company scares me. I run the offshore accounts. I control the global capital. You have nothing but a massive delusion and a ruined dress. You are completely powerless here. I stepped closer, intentionally invading his personal space, absolutely refusing to be intimidated by his aggressive posturing or his cruel insults. I kept my eyes locked onto his, completely stripping away the mask of the submissive art restorer he had mocked for 3 long years. I let him see the cold, calculating intelligence of a true Blackwood heir. I leaned in, bringing my face inches from his ear, my voice dropping to a surgical, icy whisper that sliced through his arrogant bravado. Check your Zenith portfolio, Jamal, I said, pronouncing each syllable with lethal precision. The anchor investor just pulled their 10 million seed money. Jamal froze instantly. The aggressive, towering posture immediately dissolved, replaced by a rigid, unnatural stillness that seized his entire body. The warm color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking suddenly hollow and terrified. Before his brilliant financial mind could even process the devastating weight of the words I had just spoken, the suffocating silence of the room was punctured by a harsh mechanical buzzing sound. Jamal's phone abruptly erupted in his tailored pocket. The frantic, continuous vibrations signaled an absolute financial catastrophe of biblical proportions. It was not a single text message. It was a relentless barrage of emergency alerts, automated margin calls, and frantic communications from terrified banking partners. The 10 million seed money was the only life support keeping Zenith afloat, the only capital masking the massive offshore embezzlement Jamal had orchestrated in the Cayman Islands. Without that critical anchor investment, the entire fraudulent structure was collapsing in real time, exposing his illegal activities to federal regulators. Jamal slowly reached into his pocket, his hand trembling uncontrollably as he pulled out the vibrating device. He stared down at the glowing screen, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror as he watched his carefully constructed Wall Street empire burn to the ground. The elite guests around us watched in stunned fascination as the mighty wealth manager visibly crumbled before their eyes. I took a measured step backward, smoothly adjusting the rigid collar of my expensive trench coat, and offered him a perfectly polite, utterly devastating smile as his world ended. Jamal stared at the brightly glowing screen of his smartphone, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The relentless buzzing of incoming alerts echoed loudly in the dead silence of the foyer. The high society guests who just moments ago were sipping mimosas and laughing at my expense now exchanged nervous glances, sensing the catastrophic shift in the room's energy. I did not wait for Jamal to catch his breath. I turned my back on the entire group, motioned for my legal team to follow, and walked out the mahogany front doors. The heavy doors clicked shut behind me, sealing Tristan and his family inside the townhouse they now had less than 55 minutes to vacate. The financial slaughter happened with terrifying speed. By Tuesday morning, the minor cracks in Zenith's foundation had violently widened into a massive, unfixable chasm. Olympus Holdings did not need to make public threats. A few strategically placed anonymous phone calls to the right venture capital firms were more than enough. The absolute withdrawal of the $10 million seed money triggered a massive panic among Tristan's secondary investors. Tristan sat in his leased corner office staring at a spreadsheet glowing red with massive deficits. Sweat pooled on his forehead and stained the collar of his designer shirt. His phone rang incessantly, but it was never good news. One by one, his angel investors officially pulled their term sheets. The supply chain vendors demanded immediate cash payments. His lead software developers submitted their resignations after their direct deposit paychecks bounced. The lavish lifestyle he had built entirely on credit and false promises was evaporating into thin air. He was bleeding cash, bleeding credibility, and completely out of options. Tristan slammed his laptop shut and marched out of his office, completely ignoring his panicked receptionist. He drove straight to Jamal's firm in the financial district. Jamal was barricaded inside his glass-walled office, furiously typing on his computer, frantically trying to reroute offshore funds before federal auditors noticed the missing capital. Tristan burst through the door, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. "We are dying," Tristan shouted, pacing the length of the office. "The Series A investors are completely gone. The bank is threatening to call in our loans. We need $50 million by Friday or Zenith is dead." Jamal rubbed his exhausted eyes, looking equally destroyed. "Do not yell at me," Jamal snapped. "I am risking federal prison trying to cover your massive incompetence. We have zero leverage left. Everyone in Manhattan knows Zenith is toxic." Tristan stopped pacing and slammed his hands down on Jamal's polished desk. "Not everyone," Tristan insisted, his voice dropping to a desperate manic pitch. "Olympus Holdings. They hold their annual charity gala this Saturday. It is the biggest financial event of the year. Every titan of industry will be there. If I can just secure a spot in that room, if I can just pitch directly to the CEO of Olympus, I can get the $50 million and save us." Jamal stared at Tristan as if he had completely lost his mind. "You want to crash the Olympus Gala?" Jamal asked, his voice dripping with absolute disbelief. "That event is closed to the public. The guest list is locked down months in advance. It requires an elite invitation and a minimum donation of $100,000 just to walk through the front door." "I do not care." Tristan fired back, grabbing Jamal by the lapels of his suit. You are a senior wealth manager. You manage portfolios for board members. You have connections. Use them. If Zenith goes down, the auditors will look at our ledgers, and your offshore Cayman accounts will be exposed. We both go to prison, Jamal. Get us into that gala. Jamal swallowed hard, the terrifying reality of his situation sinking in. He violently shoved Tristan away and grabbed his phone. For the next 6 hours, Jamal pulled every single professional favor he had accumulated over a decade on Wall Street. He burned bridges, made desperate promises he could not possibly keep, and completely risked the prestigious reputation of his firm. He leveraged confidential client relationships just to secure a meeting with the gala organizers. He needed 4 VIP passes. He needed access for Tristan to make the pitch. He needed access for Beverly to maintain their illusion of generational wealth. He needed access for his wife Monica to play the supportive society spouse. And he needed access for himself to ensure Tristan did not completely ruin their final chance at survival. The sun had already set over Manhattan when Jamal finally slumped back in his leather desk chair, utterly depleted and physically exhausted. His computer chimed with a priority email notification. He opened the message, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. The email contained 4 attached digital tickets and a formal letter of welcome to the Olympus Holdings Charity Gala. They were granted Platinum 5YP status, allowing them access to the exclusive upper balconies, where the executive board members mingled. Jamal let out a massive, shuddering sigh of absolute relief. He immediately forwarded the digital passes to Tristan, a triumphant smile finally replacing his mounting terror. They finally had a fighting chance. They were going to walk right into the lion's den and secure the funding they desperately needed to survive the looming federal audits. Jamal closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the leather headrest, completely unaware of the devastating trap he had just walked into. He felt a profound, intoxicating sense of victory, foolishly believing his elite Wall Street connections had saved them all from total ruin and public humiliation. He never even bothered to scroll down the screen. He never bothered to read the fine print of the formal approval message. He never noticed the elegant digital signature proudly stamped at the absolute bottom of the email. It clearly read, "Approved by Asla Sidney Blackwood, Executive Vice President of Olympus Holdings." While Jamal was celebrating his illusory victory in his glass office, I was sitting quietly at a corner table in my favorite Chelsea cafe the following morning. The rich aroma of roasted coffee beans and baked pastries filled the air, providing a brief respite from the corporate warfare I was currently orchestrating. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and watched the bustling Manhattan street through the large window. My moment of peace did not last long. The bell above the cafe door chimed loudly. Tristan pushed his way through the morning crowd, his eyes darting around the room until they locked onto me. He looked absolutely dreadful. The perfectly groomed tech CEO persona had completely vanished. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and deep dark bags bruised the skin under his bloodshot eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, a man whose entire reality was rapidly imploding. He marched over to my small table and pulled out the chair opposite me, collapsing into it heavily without waiting for an invitation. "I just need 5 minutes," Tristan muttered, rubbing his hands over his face. He leaned forward, attempting to project an aura of exhausted vulnerability. He wanted me to feel sorry for him. He wanted me to remember the man I had married and take pity on his current suffering. "I am losing my mind, Sydney," he continued, his voice trembling with manufactured distress. "The investors are fleeing. The bank is breathing down my neck. My mother is having a nervous breakdown over the eviction notice. Zenith is bleeding cash, and I am the one taking all the hits. You have completely ruined my life. I am drowning here, and you are just sitting in a cafe drinking coffee like nothing happened." I set my mug down on the wooden table and looked at him impassively. "You ruined your own life, Tristan," I replied smoothly. "You cheated on me. You locked me out of my own accounts. You hired vandals to destroy my art studio. Do not come here expecting sympathy for the consequences of your own vicious actions." The pathetic victim routine instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, desperate malice. The mask slipped, revealing the ruthless narcissist hiding beneath. He reached inside his wrinkled jacket and pulled out a thick legal document, slamming it down on the table between our coffee cups. "I am not here for sympathy," Tristan sneered, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening pitch. "I am here to give you one final chance to walk away before I destroy you." I glanced down at this paper. The bold heading at the top read, "Post-nuptial agreement." "Sign it," Tristan demanded, leaning over the table. "Sign away your rights to the townhouse, transfer the deed to my name, and I will call off my lawyers. I will let you walk away with your little art restoration business intact." I looked from the document to his desperate, sweating face. "And if I refuse?" Tristan smiled, a nasty, triumphant curve of his lips. "If you refuse, I am going to the press this afternoon. I have already drafted the statement. I will tell them that your precious art restoration business is nothing but a high-end front for selling forged paintings. I will claim that you have been passing off fake 17th century masterpieces to wealthy European clients for years. I will say I discovered your illegal operation, and that is the real reason our marriage fell apart." He tapped the document forcefully with his index finger. "The media will devour the story, Sydney. A bitter, fraudulent wife running an international forgery ring out of a historic brick loft. The authorities will raid your studio. They will confiscate every single canvas. Your reputation in the art world will be completely obliterated. You will not just lose your clients. You will go to federal prison. Sign the paper right now." He genuinely believed he had me cornered. He thought he had found the perfect leverage to force my hand, utilizing the very thing I loved most to orchestrate my surrender. He expected me to panic, to cry, to beg him not to ruin my livelihood. He wanted to see me broken and defeated. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly, carefully dropping my gaze to the table. I allowed my breathing to become shallow and uneven, perfectly mimicking the physical response of a terrified, cornered woman. I bit my lower lip and let a single tremor shake my hands as I reached out to touch the edge of the post-nuptial agreement. "You would really do that?" I whispered, my voice sounding weak and defeated. "You would send me to prison over a townhouse." "It is business, Sydney," Tristan replied coldly. "You should have stayed in your lane. Now pick up a pen and sign the damn paper before I lose my patience." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes averted. I reached into the inner pocket of my trench coat and pulled out an expensive, sleek silver fountain pen. It was a beautiful custom-weighted instrument, a graduation gift from my billionaire father that I carried with me everywhere. I clicked the cap off my hand, shaking just enough to sell the performance, and quickly signed my name on the dotted line at the bottom of the document. Tristan snatched the paper off the table the second my pen lifted from the page. He inspected the signature, a massive, victorious grin splitting his exhausted face. "Good girl," Tristan mocked, folding the document and shoving it back into his jacket pocket. "You finally did something smart. Do not ever try to outplay me again." He stood up, kicking his chair back, and marched out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. My feigned terror instantly vanished. I tapped the top of my pen, disabling the micro camera that had just live-streamed his entire blackmail attempt. Checkmate, Tristan. I watched Tristan disappear down the bustling Chelsea sidewalk, my thumb resting lightly on the silver cap of my fountain pen. The server containing his recorded felony extortion was now securely locked behind layers of encryption. Tristan and his family were not content attempting to steal my townhouse and my dignity. They wanted absolute annihilation. Before I even finished my cold coffee, my mobile phone vibrated with a frantic barrage of new notifications. I opened my social media networking applications and found my name trending across local high society networks. Beverly and Monica had launched a coordinated, vicious online smear campaign. They had weaponized their massive followings, blasting out highly edited videos and completely fabricated narratives. Beverly posted a dramatic, tearful monologue claiming I was severely mentally unstable and had been secretly draining Tristan's accounts to fund a lavish double life. Monica followed up with a vicious written post labeling me a desperate gold digger who had manipulated her older brother. They did not stop there. Taking Tristan's blackmail threat to the public, they actively spread rumors that my art restoration business was a complete fraud. Monica claimed I was selling cheap replicas to rich, unsuspecting European buyers and using the Blackwood name to run a sophisticated scam. They tagged prominent art critics, gallery owners, and wealthy socialites, ensuring maximum exposure. The digital assault was meticulously designed to utterly destroy my professional reputation and isolate me from any potential allies. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. My email inbox flooded with urgent messages from my most prestigious clients. A gallery in Paris canceled a highly lucrative restoration contract for a 19th century landscape, citing the disturbing allegations circulating online. Another private collector in Geneva demanded the immediate return of a damaged portrait I had spent 3 months painstakingly repairing. My phone rang continuously with nervous assistants and aggressive wealth managers pulling out of our signed agreements. The public humiliation was intense, meant to completely break my spirit. I sat in the quiet cafe watching the work of my life being dragged through the mud by people who produced absolutely nothing of value. Beverly and Monica expected me to issue desperate denials, to cry on camera, or to release frantic statements defending my character. They wanted a public war. Instead, I silenced my phone and slipped it into my pocket. I did not care about the canceled contracts or the vicious rumors. Those clients could be replaced and my reputation would be restored the moment the truth came out. I ignored the noise completely. I was entirely focused on the trap I had set. Every lie they posted, every defamatory video they uploaded was just another piece of evidence for my brilliant legal team. Across the city, Tristan was completely oblivious to the federal crime he had just committed on camera. He marched back into his leased office at Zenith, fueled by the delusion that he had successfully blackmailed me into submission. His false confidence swelled to dangerous levels when his email inbox pinged with the exact message he had been desperately praying for. It was a formal communication from the powerful executive board of Olympus Holdings. Tristan opened the email, his eyes devouring the text. It was an exclusive, highly restricted invitation to a private pitch session at the upcoming Olympus Holdings charity gala. The email stated that the executive team was extremely interested in Zenith's market potential and had reserved a private boardroom at the venue specifically for Tristan to present his grand vision. If the pitch was successful, Olympus Holdings was prepared to immediately authorize a $50 million capital injection. Tristan leapt out of his chair, letting out a roar of absolute triumph. He paced the length of his office, his fists clenched in victory. He genuinely believed he had won the lottery. He thought his aggressive tactics had bullied the universe into yielding to his desires. He envisioned the $50 million rescuing his bankrupt company, elevating him to the ranks of Manhattan's true elite, and permanently securing his lavish lifestyle. He picked up his mobile phone to call Jamal, ready to gloat about his brilliant success. Tristan's euphoric celebration came to a sudden, violent halt as his eyes scanned the final paragraph of the Olympus Holdings invitation. The smile dropped from his face, replaced by a cold, suffocating panic. The executive board required a mandatory real-time certified financial audit of Zenith to be submitted directly to their secure portal exactly 24 hours prior to the gala. They demanded total transparency regarding current liquid assets, outstanding debts, and verified revenue streams. Zenith had zero liquid assets, massive offshore debts, and completely fabricated revenue streams. Tristan was staring at a brick wall. Submitting an honest audit meant immediate bankruptcy and potential investigation. Not submitting the audit meant losing the $50 million and facing total ruin. He dialed Jamal's number, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his phone. When Jamal answered, Tristan did not ask for a favor, he demanded survival. Tristan aggressively ordered his brother-in-law to bypass every financial regulation and artificially inflate Zenith's numbers. Jamal resisted, screaming that submitting falsified documents to a titan like Olympus Holdings was corporate suicide. But Tristan used the post-nuptial agreement as his ultimate weapon, claiming he had already secured the townhouse, and their financial future was safe. He pushed, threatened, and begged until Jamal finally broke. Sitting in his glass-walled office, sweating through his custom suit, Jamal logged into his secure banking portal. He illegally manipulated the ledger's shifting phantom offshore capital to create the illusion of a thriving, highly profitable tech company. He generated a fraudulent certified financial audit and attached his own firm's prestigious seal of approval. With a trembling finger, Jamal hit send, transmitting the documents directly to Olympus Holdings. He thought he was saving his family. He had absolutely no idea he had just cemented federal wire fraud charges for both of them, locking the final deadbolt on my trap. The crisp autumn air of Manhattan crackled with electric anticipation outside the legendary Plaza Hotel. It was the night of the annual Olympus Holdings Charity Gala, an event so exclusive that billionaires routinely found themselves waitlisted. A sea of flashing camera lenses and velvet ropes barricaded the grand entrance, holding back the frantic press eager to catch a glimpse of global financial royalty. A sleek black limousine pulled to a stop at the edge of the crimson carpet. The driver opened the heavy door and Tristan stepped out into the blinding crossfire of paparazzi flashbulbs. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored tuxedo, his chest puffed out with absolute unearned arrogance. Beverly and Monica followed close behind him, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. They were dripping in rented diamonds and borrowed couture, desperate to project the illusion of generational wealth. Beverly waved regally at the photographers, who had absolutely no idea who she was, while Monica linked her arm through his, her face stretched into a practiced, predatory smile. Jamal brought up the rear, his tuxedo immaculate, though a thin sheen of nervous sweat glistened on his forehead. The forged audit was a ticking time bomb in his mind, but the intoxicating glow of the red carpet offered a temporary blinding distraction. They marched up the plush steps and surrendered their digital platinum passes to the imposing security detail, sailing straight into the opulent grand ballroom. The interior of the plaza was a breathtaking display of unimaginable wealth. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of extremely powerful Manhattan figures. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. Tristan did not waste a single second admiring the architecture. He immediately plunged into the crowd, dragging his family along as he aggressively hunted for Wall Street titans. He spotted a group of prominent venture capitalists standing near an ice sculpture and smoothly inserted himself into their circle. He swirled his champagne glass, dropping the name Olympus Holdings into conversation within 30 seconds. "We are in final negotiations," Tristan boasted loudly, making sure his voice carried over the elegant string quartet playing in the corner. The executive board practically begged Zenith to come in for a private pitch session tonight. "We are looking at a $50 million capital injection to scale our proprietary software globally." The investors exchanged politely skeptical glances, well aware of the toxic rumors surrounding Zenith, but his sheer manic confidence gave them momentary pause. Beverly and Monica played their supporting roles flawlessly. They fluttered around the wives of banking executives, loudly discussing imaginary summer homes in the Hamptons and dropping subtle, venomous hints about my supposed mental breakdown. They were actively celebrating my demise, convinced they had successfully buried me in the ashes of their upward mobility. Jamal stood near the private bar, downing his second scotch, nodding along, as Tristan continued to spin a web of elaborate financial lies. They were flying dangerously close to the sun, intoxicated by the proximity to absolute power, entirely ignorant of the fact that the very ground beneath their feet was a carefully constructed stage designed for their public execution. Suddenly, a massive ripple of frantic energy surged through the ballroom. The polite murmur of high society networking violently fractured. Security personnel in dark suits began forcefully clearing a wide path straight down the center of the room, pushing back billionaires and hedge fund managers alike. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Outside, the muffled roar of the paparazzi escalated into a deafening, frenzied screaming. The massive oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with dramatic force. A fleet of 4 armored black Maybachs had just pulled up directly to the VIP entrance, completely bypassing the standard red carpet protocol. Flashing police escorts bathed the street in pulsing red and blue light. Tristan suddenly stopped speaking, his champagne glass hovering near his mouth. He turned toward the entrance, craning his neck, eager to see which global titan commanded this level of staggering security. He assumed it was the elusive CEO of Olympus Holdings arriving to personally welcome him. 6 elite private bodyguards stepped into the ballroom, first their eyes scanning the crowd with cold professional efficiency. They formed a tight protective perimeter around the entrance. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The door of the lead Maybach opened. A sleek silver stiletto stepped onto the carpet. I emerged from the armored vehicle and walked straight through the heavy oak doors into the blazing light of the chandeliers. I was not wearing the exhausted, defeated expression of a ruined woman. I was wearing a breathtaking $200,000 custom couture gown made of midnight blue silk and woven platinum threads. The fabric caught the light like liquid diamonds. A flawless diamond choker rested against my collarbone, radiating absolute untouchable power. The room erupted into a symphony of gasps and frantic whispers. Camera flashes exploded like a lightning storm as the elite society photographers rushed the perimeter, desperately shouting my name. I walked down the cleared center aisle, my head held high, my gaze sweeping over the crowd of stunned elites. His jaw unhinged, the color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving him looking like a reanimated corpse. The champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered violently against the marble floor. Beverly let out a choked, undignified gasp, clutching her rented pearls as if she was having a heart attack. Monica took a staggering step backward, nearly colliding with a waiter. Jamal simply froze, his eyes locked onto me in absolute paralyzing terror. Tristan stared at the woman he thought he had completely destroyed, the woman he had just blackmailed in a cheap coffee shop, now arriving at the most exclusive financial gala in the world, with a security detail that rivaled a head of state. He was staring directly at his executioner, and he finally truly understood that he had never possessed a shred of control. The deafening silence that followed my arrival was broken only by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. I moved gracefully across the marble foyer, ignoring the stunned whispers of Manhattan's elite. My gaze remained locked forward, projecting an aura of absolute authority. I watched the realization wash over my estranged husband's face, but his mother was entirely incapable of reading the room. Beverly's initial shock rapidly mutated into a fiery indignation-fueled rage. Her face flushed crimson beneath her makeup. How dare I intrude on her manufactured triumph? She shoved past a distinguished hedge fund manager, her rented heels clicking sharply against the floor as she marched directly into my path. "Did you rent that dress to stalk my son?" Beverly shrieked, her shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She pointed a trembling, jeweled finger inches from my face. She did not care about the audience surrounding us. She only cared about asserting her imagined dominance. "You obsessive, pathetic little gold digger! How did you even get past the front door? Did you sleep with a bouncer?" The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Several socialites stepped back, clearly repulsed by Beverly's vulgar display. I simply stood there, my posture relaxed, observing her meltdown with mild amusement. My silence only infuriated her further. She turned her wild gaze toward the perimeter of the room. "Security!" Beverly yelled, waving her arms frantically. "Get over here right now! Throw this trashy escort out before she ruins the entire gala!" Tristan quickly shook off his initial paralysis. Seeing his mother take the offensive provided him with a surge of false courage. He stepped forward to join her, puffing out his chest and attempting to project the image of a protective, powerful executive dealing with a nuisance. He completely ignored the reality of my billionaire father's security detail standing just a few feet away, blinding himself with his own arrogance. "This woman is mentally ill," Tristan announced, loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the venture capitalists he had been courting. He adopted a tone of fake sympathy. "She is my estranged wife. She has been having a severe psychological breakdown for weeks. She has been harassing my family, stalking my movements, and creating elaborate delusions. I apologize to everyone for this disruption. She belongs in a psychiatric ward, not the Plaza Hotel." Monica eagerly rushed to her brother's side, sensing an opportunity to twist the knife. "We already posted about her unhinged behavior online," Monica chimed in, addressing the crowd with a sweet smile. "She is completely obsessed with our family's wealth. She even tried to scam her own art clients. It is honestly tragic at this point. Please, someone call the authorities before she hurts herself or someone else." Jamal remained glued to the bar, his face slick with nervous sweat. He possessed just enough street smarts to realize that my presence here, flanked by elite bodyguards and wearing a gown that cost more than his annual salary, meant their entire narrative was fatally flawed. But he was too terrified to intervene, choosing to watch the train wreck in silent horror. I maintained my composed silence, allowing them to dig their graves as deep as possible. The more they screamed, the more unhinged they appeared to the very people they were trying to impress. I smoothed an invisible crease on my silk skirt, entirely unbothered by their vicious verbal assault. My calm demeanor was the ultimate insult to their chaotic panic. Right on cue, two massive security guards in immaculate black suits detached themselves from the shadows near the entrance. They moved with swift, silent purpose, their sheer size parting the crowd of onlookers. They were built like linebackers, radiating an intimidating, no-nonsense energy. Tristan spotted their approach and let out a loud, triumphant laugh. He crossed his arms over his chest, his lips curling into a deeply arrogant smirk. He looked at me with absolute contempt, fully expecting to witness my violent public humiliation. Finally, Tristan sneered, taking a step back to give the guards room to work. Grab her by the arms and drag her out into the street where she belongs. If she resists, call the police and press trespassing charges. I am absolutely done playing games with this lunatic. Make an example out of her. Beverly nodded vigorously in agreement, a nasty, vindictive gleam in her eyes. Make sure the paparazzi get a good picture of her being thrown out, she added spitefully. Maybe then she will finally understand her place. The two massive guards marched directly toward our confrontation. Tristan's smirk widened into a full grin. He shifted his weight, visibly bracing himself to enjoy the spectacle of me being physically removed from the premises. He thought he had won. He thought his sheer audacity had prevailed once again. The guards stepped past Beverly. They stepped past Monica. They stepped directly past Tristan, completely ignoring his frantic instructions. They positioned themselves on either side of me, turning outward to face my in-laws, their hands clasped firmly behind their backs in a protective stance. Tristan's victorious grin instantly melted into a mask of pure confusion. He blinked rapidly, looking from the guards to me, unable to process why I was not currently being dragged across the marble floor. A third man approached from the entrance. He was older, wearing a sharply tailored tuxedo with a discreet earpiece coiled around his neck. He moved with the undeniable authority of a man in charge of the entire operation. It was the head of security for Olympus Holdings. He completely bypassed Tristan, not even acknowledging his existence. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me and executed a crisp, deeply respectful bow. The entire ballroom fell dead silent, the collective shock sucking the oxygen from the room. "Is this man bothering you, Ms. Blackwood?" The head of security asked, his voice steady and deferential, carrying very clearly across the quiet foyer. "Shall I have him removed from your gala now?" Tristan blinked, his face contorting into a mask of utter bewilderment. He looked at the head of security, then back at me, his brain completely failing as it tried to process the words he had just heard. Blackwood. The name hung in the opulent air of the foyer, heavy and foreign. He let out a sharp, derisive snort, stepping forward and aggressively pointing a finger at the older man in the tailored tuxedo. "You have the wrong person, buddy." Tristan scoffed, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "Her name is Sydney. She is my wife. Well, my soon-to-be ex-wife. She restores old paintings in a dusty brick loft downtown. She is not a Blackwood, and this is certainly not her gala. You need to check your guest list before you embarrass yourself further. I suggest you do your job and escort this mentally unstable woman out of the building before I call your superiors and have you fired." While Tristan doubled down on his aggressive delusion, Jamal was undergoing a catastrophic physical and psychological collapse. As a senior wealth manager who handled portfolios for Manhattan financial elite, Jamal made it his business to know the faces of the people who truly ran the world. He did not just recognize the legendary name, Blackwood. He recognized the dangerous man standing directly in front of me. The distinguished older gentleman with the earpiece was not a standard hotel rent-a-cop. He was Marcus Thorne, the highly feared personal security director for Vincent Blackwood, the notoriously reclusive billionaire titan who essentially owned half the city. Jamal stared at Marcus, then shifted his terrified, wide-eyed gaze to me, taking in the spectacular $200,000 couture gown and the impenetrable wall of elite bodyguards. The pieces violently clicked together in his racing mind. The anonymous venture capital withdrawal, the sudden, unfixable collapse of Zenith. The miraculously approved VIP gala tickets, stamped with the signature of an executive vice president. It had never been a stroke of luck. It had been a flawlessly executed high-level corporate slaughter. The color instantly drained from the face of Jamal, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His breathing turned shallow and erratic as the crushing, terrifying weight of the massive federal wire fraud he had just committed bore down on his chest. Jamal lunged forward, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the immaculate marble floor. He grabbed Tristan by the bicep, his grip so desperate and incredibly tight that Tristan physically flinched in surprise. Tristan, shut up. Jamal hissed, his voice a frantic, breathless whisper that barely concealed his mounting, uncontrollable hysteria. Do you have any idea who the Blackwoods are? You need to stop talking right now. Tristan violently yanked his arm out of the grasp, shooting his sweating brother-in-law a look of absolute, unfiltered disgust. Get your hands off me! Jamal Tristan snapped aggressively, smoothing the sleeve of his designer jacket. You are sweating like a pig and making us look absolutely pathetic. Do not lose your nerve now just because this fraud showed up wearing rented jewelry. We are pitching for $50 million tonight. I am not going to let this crazy woman ruin my incredible momentum. Tristan turned his arrogant, punchable smirk back toward Marcus Thorne, completely blind to the catastrophic, life-ruining danger looming directly over his head. Beverly crossed her arms, her chin tilted upward in an aggressive display of false superiority, while Monica pulled out her smartphone, clearly preparing to record my impending removal. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the center of a lethal kill box. I offered Marcus a small, appreciative smile, completely ignoring the frantic, pathetic circus happening mere inches away from me. I am perfectly fine, Marcus, I replied smoothly, my voice totally calm and ringing with undeniable, absolute authority. Let them stay. I want them to enjoy the spectacular show. They have worked so very hard to get here tonight. Marcus nodded respectfully, stepping back slightly, but keeping his eyes locked onto Tristan with a cold, predatory, and unyielding focus. The tense, suffocating standoff was suddenly interrupted by a magnificent orchestrated shift in the grand ballroom atmosphere. The ambient lighting dimmed gracefully, plunging the perimeter of the room into soft, elegant shadows, while brilliant, blinding spotlights illuminated the massive floral-draped stage at the far end of the glorious hall. The polite, muted chatter of the assembled billionaire guests instantly hushed, replaced by an electric buzzing and palpable anticipation. The elite crowd began to naturally part, creating a wide, unobstructed, and pristine pathway leading directly from my position to the front of the stage. The exquisite symphony quartet transitioned into a sweeping, dramatic, and powerful overture, signaling the beginning of the main event. Tristan puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie, and craning his neck to get a better view, foolishly believing this grand spectacle was simply the magnificent precursor to his own imaginary, unprecedented triumph. He thought his moment of ultimate glory was finally arriving. A remarkably tall, highly distinguished master of ceremonies confidently stepped up to the brilliant, gleaming crystal podium, gently adjusting the slender silver microphone with practiced, effortless ease. The massive, breathtaking room fell into absolute, terrifyingly still, pin-drop silence. Ladies and distinguished gentlemen of Olympus, the master of ceremonies, announced his rich, incredibly powerful voice, echoing flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. We sincerely thank every single one of you for your profound, unprecedented generosity tonight. Your massive financial contributions will fully fund our crucial global philanthropic initiatives for the coming decade, saving countless innocent lives across the entire world for many years to come. Now, without any further hesitation or delay whatsoever, please direct your attention to the center aisle and stand to welcome our esteemed keynote speaker, the brilliantly talented Executive Vice President and the sole, undisputed inheritor of the truly magnificent Olympus Holdings financial empire today. The magnificent echoes of the Master of Ceremonies' voice reverberated off the vaulted frescoed ceilings of the grand ballroom, hanging in the air like a final, inescapable verdict. The Sea of Manhattan elite, previously a chaotic swirl of networking and hushed deals, parted completely, creating a pristine, wide, velvet-lined corridor that led directly to the grand marble staircase. I stepped forward, my midnight blue couture gown sweeping silently across the floor, every single eye in the room fixed entirely upon me. The 6 elite private bodyguards fanned out flawlessly, securing the perimeter of the stage with practiced, lethal precision. I placed my stiletto on the first marble step, feeling the cold, solid reality of my birthright grounding me. For years, I had hidden my identity to build my own life, to prove my own worth away from the colossal shadow of the Blackwood Empire. I ascended the grand staircase with deliberate, measured grace, shedding the false, pathetic narrative my in-laws had aggressively tried to force upon me. As I reached the magnificent crystal podium, a brilliant, blinding spotlight snapped on, bathing me in a radiant, unyielding glow. Down in the center of the bewildered crowd, Tristan was experiencing a catastrophic psychological collapse. The sheer impossibility of the announcement shattered the fragile, delusional reality he had constructed. The fresh champagne glass he had blindly snatched from a passing waiter only moments ago slipped through his trembling fingers. It hit the immaculate marble floor with a sharp, violent crash, the crystal shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces that scattered across the polished stone. The sound was deafening in the dead silent ballroom. Beside him, Beverly let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Her hands flew up her fingers, desperately clutching the heavy diamond necklace resting against her chest. Her face turned a sickly, translucent white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as she struggled to pull oxygen into her seizing lungs. The wealthy socialites she had been eagerly trying to impress just minutes prior immediately took several large, disgusted steps backward, isolating the entire family in a circle of public shame. I stood at the podium, gripping the smooth crystal edges, and looked directly out into the blinding sea of powerful faces. I did not search for the faces of the venture capitalists or the hedge fund managers. My gaze cut straight through the dazzling lights and locked onto Tristan. He looked incredibly small, stripped of his unearned arrogance, standing perfectly still in the center of the shattered glass, like a frightened, cornered animal. The man who had spent years systematically tearing down my self-esteem, who had gleefully weaponized his family to destroy my professional reputation, was now entirely at my mercy. I adjusted the slender silver microphone, the soft hum of the sound system confirming that every single syllable I spoke would be broadcast with crystal clear perfection. Exactly 1 week ago, my husband slapped me in front of 200 people, calling me a useless dropout. I stated, my voice echoing with icy, unwavering authority across the silent expanse of the grand ballroom. I did not raise my voice, nor did I allow a single tremor of emotion to crack my composed facade. The absolute brutal honesty of the statement sent a physical shockwave through the elite crowd. Tonight, I continued, my eyes never leaving Tristan's terrified, wide, and desperate gaze. I am the one holding the $50 million check he is begging for. A collective, deeply horrified gasp rippled through the assembled billionaires, investors, and media moguls. The very venture capitalist Tristan had been aggressively pitching his fraudulent tech company to just moments before, now stared at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. In the cutthroat world of Manhattan, high-finance public humiliation of this magnitude was a terminal disease. Whispers erupted like a sudden wildfire, the names Zenith and Tristan instantly becoming synonymous with absolute professional suicide. Monica, standing slightly behind her mother, visibly shrank, her face burning with profound humiliation as she frantically tried to hide behind a towering floral arrangement. The meticulously crafted illusion of their superior, untouchable status was actively burning to the ground in front of the most powerful people on the planet. Tristan's mind violently rejected the reality of his total destruction, fueled by a toxic combination of absolute panic and deeply ingrained narcissism. A dangerous, desperate delusion took hold of him. He still genuinely believed that if he could just reach me, if he could just deploy the same manipulative tactics he had used for years, he could somehow salvage the $50 million lifeline his bankrupt company desperately needed. He thought a public apology, a theatrical display of remorse, could erase the blackmail, the physical abuse, and the coordinated smear campaign. Ignoring the elite security detail, ignoring the disgusted stares of the financial titans surrounding him, Tristan suddenly lunged forward, breaking the invisible perimeter the crowd had formed. He intended to rush the stage, desperate to throw himself at my feet. He barely even made it 2 full steps. A hand clamped down on the back of Tristan's tailored tuxedo jacket with bone-crushing violent force, instantly halting his frantic momentum. It was Jamal. The wealth manager was completely drenched in a cold, terrified sweat, his eyes darting frantically around the room like a trapped rat calculating the fastest route to survival. Jamal brutally yanked Tristan backward, nearly pulling him off his feet. Jamal knew with terrifying certainty that the $50 million was never going to materialize. He knew that the certified financial audit he had illegally altered and transmitted to Olympus Holdings was now sitting directly in the hands of the very woman they had been trying to destroy. While Tristan was desperately, foolishly trying to save his bruised ego and his bankrupt company, Jamal was staring down the barrel of federal wire fraud charges and a lengthy prison sentence, sweating profusely and actively looking for an immediate, quiet exit out of the highly secured building. I ascended the grand staircase with deliberate and measured grace. The brilliant spotlight tracked my every movement, casting a radiant halo around my midnight blue couture gown. The applause from the Manhattan elite was deafening, a wave of immense respect and anticipation washing over the grand ballroom. I reached the gleaming crystal podium, resting my hands lightly on its smooth edges. Looking out over the sea of powerful billionaires and industry titans, I allowed the applause to naturally fade into an electric, breathless silence. My eyes cut through the blinding glare of the stage lights, locking instantly onto Tristan. He stood paralyzed near the center aisle, trapped in the wreckage of his shattered champagne glass. A week ago, my husband slapped me across the face in front of 200 people, calling me a useless dropout and a pathetic burden, I stated. My voice rang out through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing with icy, unwavering authority. I did not yell. I did not display a single fraction of emotional distress. The brutal, unfiltered honesty of my opening statement sent a massive physical shockwave through the elite crowd. Gasps erupted from the front rows. Tonight, however, I continued my gaze, boring directly into Tristan's terrified, wide eyes. I am the one holding the $50 million check he is begging for. Tristan's face drained of all remaining color, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. Fueled by a toxic combination of absolute panic and desperate delusion, he suddenly lunged forward. He intended to rush the stage foolishly, believing he could grovel and salvage the capital injection his bankrupt company desperately needed. He barely made it 2 steps. A hand clamped down on the back of his tailored tuxedo jacket with bone-crushing force. Jamal violently yanked Tristan backward, dragging him away from the aisle. Jamal was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately seeking an escape route. Olympus Holdings was built on a foundation of absolute transparency and relentless integrity. I announced, projecting my voice to command the attention of the entire ballroom. We invest in visionary leaders. We do not invest in criminals. Tristan Blackwood, operating under the assumption that I was a naive, disconnected art restorer, submitted a formal pitch to our executive board. He demanded a $50 million capital injection for his software startup Zenith. He claimed his enterprise possessed a $100 million valuation. I reached into the pocket of my gown and retrieved a sleek platinum remote. I aimed it at the massive wall behind me and pressed the center button. But let us look at the real numbers, I said smoothly. The 3 towering LED screens behind the stage instantly flared to life, illuminating the entire ballroom with glaring, undeniable truth. On the left side of the massive display, the highly doctored falsified financial audit appeared in crisp, high-definition resolution. The fraudulent document clearly displayed the fabricated revenue streams, the phantom offshore capital, and the prestigious seal of approval from Jamal's wealth management firm. On the right side of the screen, the authentic, completely disastrous internal ledgers materialized. These were the real numbers I had meticulously extracted from Tristan's hidden wall safe. The side-by-side comparison was absolutely devastating. The right screen showed 0 liquid assets, crippling offshore debts, and a high burn rate guaranteeing immediate insolvency. The entire ballroom of seasoned investors began muttering in profound shock and rising anger. The venture capitalists who had been eagerly listening to Tristan's arrogant boasts now stared at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. In the cutthroat world of Manhattan high finance, this level of deception was considered an unforgivable terminal disease. Tristan was instantly marked as radioactive. "This is not a technology company," I announced to the elite crowd, letting my words fall like heavy stones. Zenith is a sophisticated Ponzi scheme built on a mountain of toxic debt. Furthermore, the document on the left, the certified audit formally submitted to Olympus Holdings' secure portal just 24 hours ago, constitutes textbook undeniable federal wire fraud. The murmurs escalated into an uproar. Prominent bankers and hedge fund managers aggressively backed away from the Blackwood family, isolating them in a wide circle of public contamination. Beverly clutched her chest, letting out a sharp, ragged gasp as the reality of their total social and financial ruin finally pierced her thick skull. She swayed dangerously on her rented heels. The wealthy socialites she had desperately tried to impress, now looking at her with open, mocking contempt. Monica frantically tried to hide her face behind a floral arrangement, her predatory confidence completely evaporating under the harsh, unforgiving light of public exposure. They were ruined, stripped of their false prestige, and exposed as desperate, malicious frauds. While Tristan stood frozen in a state of catatonic shock, staring blankly at the massive screens displaying his imminent incarceration, Jamal made his move. The wealth manager knew the presentation of the forged audit meant his prestigious career and his freedom were officially over. He abandoned his wife and his brother-in-law without a second thought. Keeping his head down, Jamal slipped through the outraged crowd, desperately navigating toward the heavy oak doors at the very back of the grand ballroom. He moved with the frantic, slippery urgency of a drowning man. Jamal reached the exit, his hands slick with cold sweat. He threw his weight against the polished brass handles, expecting to burst out into the lobby and make a run for the loading dock. The heavy oak doors did not move. He shoved them again, panic clawing at his throat. The handles were locked tight from the outside. Jamal spun around, his chest heaving with cold terror. Standing silently in the deep velvet shadows of the rear alcove were 4 imposing men. They were not wearing hotel security uniforms or tuxedos. They were wearing dark utilitarian windbreakers with 3 bright yellow letters printed boldly across their chests. They were agents of the FBI. Jamal did not even have the breath to scream. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, flashing a gold badge that caught the ambient light of the ballroom. He smoothly produced a pair of heavy steel handcuffs securing Jamal's wrists behind his back with practiced, brutal efficiency. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The agent stated, his voice a low, lethal hum that sliced through Jamal's remaining sanity. "You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you do." Jamal was swiftly escorted through a side service exit, erased from the high society gathering like a phantom error on a balance sheet. Meanwhile, back in the center of the grand ballroom, the catastrophic fallout of my presentation was reaching its absolute climax. The massive LED screens continued to broadcast Tristan's complete financial insolvency. The angry murmurs of the Manhattan elite had swelled into a deafening roar of outrage. Tristan stood paralyzed, a pathetic statue surrounded by shattered crystal, completely incapable of processing the magnitude of his ruin. Beverly and Monica were frantically backing toward the exit, their faces pale and slick with panicked sweat, abandoning him to the wolves. Then a low, resonant chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system, instantly silencing the chaotic uproar. A single blinding spotlight suddenly shifted away from me at the podium and shot directly up toward the grand VIP balcony overlooking the entire ballroom. The heavy velvet curtains framing the balcony parted. A towering figure stepped out of the shadows and into the stark, brilliant light. Vincent Blackwood surveyed the room with the chilling, calculating eyes of an apex predator. He wore a masterfully tailored charcoal suit that radiated generational power and absolute, unyielding authority. The collective breath of the room vanished. The financial titans who had just been loudly condemning Tristan now stood in terrified, reverent silence. This was the man who could end their careers with a single phone call, the elusive billionaire who reigned supreme over Olympus Holdings. He rested his large hands on the ornate brass railing of the balcony, looking down at Tristan, not as a rival, but as an insignificant, bothersome insect waiting to be crushed underfoot. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Vincent finally spoke. "You struck my daughter." Vincent's voice boomed, the words amplified by the acoustics of the ballroom, hitting the crowd with the force of a physical blow. The sheer terrifying anger vibrating beneath his controlled tone made seasoned investors flinch. Tristan's knees buckled. The remaining shreds of his fragile toxic ego completely evaporated under the crushing weight of Vincent Blackwood's lethal gaze. He collapsed onto the marble floor, the sharp shards of his broken champagne glass biting into the expensive fabric of his trousers. He did not care about the physical pain. He only cared about survival. "Sir, please," Tristan wailed, hot tears of absolute panic streaming down his flushed, pathetic face. He threw his hands up in a desperate begging gesture, looking up at the balcony like a condemned man pleading with a merciless judge. "I did not know. I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea she was your daughter. I love her. I have always loved her. It was just a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. Please, you have to believe me." His voice cracked, echoing pitifully across the silent, stunned ballroom. The billionaires and socialites stared at him with unfiltered disgust, thoroughly repulsed by his sudden cowardly groveling. The man who had spent years acting like an untouchable king was now sobbing on the floor, abandoning every ounce of his pride in a frantic bid to save his own skin. He clawed at the marble, desperately trying to drag himself toward the grand staircase, wanting to throw himself at my feet. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not yell. He simply turned and began to descend the sweeping marble staircase with slow, deliberate, and terrifying steps. The elite security detail parted seamlessly to let him through. Every time his polished leather shoe met a marble step, the sound echoed like a judge's gavel striking a heavy block. Tristan stopped crawling, his breath hitching in his chest as the imposing titan drew closer. He looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic, silently begging for an intervention I would never provide. I stood at the podium watching him with cold, detached satisfaction. This was the exact reality he had earned. Vincent reached the bottom of the staircase and walked directly up to the weeping, pathetic mess of a man. He stopped just inches away, towering over Tristan. "Ignorance is not a legal defense against bankruptcy, boy," Vincent stated, his voice a lethal frozen whisper that carried across the entire room. "You thought you could abuse my daughter in the shadows, leverage her skills, and then discard her when you felt powerful. You thought you were playing a game you could control." Tristan choked on a sob, shaking his head frantically. "I can fix this," Tristan pleaded, his voice a pathetic squeak. "I can make it right. I will sign whatever you want me to sign right now. Please, just give me one more chance." Vincent reached inside the breast pocket of his charcoal jacket. His movements were smooth, calculated, and absolutely devoid of mercy. He pulled out a thick, folded legal document printed on heavy watermarked parchment. He held it out, dropping it directly onto the marble floor right in front of Tristan's trembling hands. "Olympus Holdings did not just reject your fraudulent pitch tonight," Vincent announced, his tone utterly final and dripping with absolute ruin. "We officially bought your entire debt portfolio this morning. Every single offshore loan, every stretched line of credit, and every outstanding financial obligation. You owe us $15 million payable immediately." Vincent looked down at him, a cold, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Since you are currently in severe default, we are legally seizing all your remaining assets." Tristan remained on his knees, staring blankly at the heavy watermarked parchment resting on the marble floor. The reality of a $15 million immediate default crashed over him, paralyzing his vocal cords and draining the last pathetic ounce of fight from his trembling body. He was entirely broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had strutted into this gala an hour ago. Seeing her golden child instantly reduced to absolute nothingness, Beverly experienced a violent, desperate shift in survival tactics. The predatory socialite instinct kicked into overdrive. She realized in a terrifying flash that Tristan could no longer provide the lavish lifestyle she demanded. He was a sinking ship, dragging massive federal debt and impending prison time down with him. I was the only lifeboat remaining in the room. Beverly shoved past her catatonic son, her rented heels clicking sharply against the floor as she rushed toward the base of the grand staircase. She threw her hands up to her face, a masterful theatrical display of fabricated maternal anguish. Tears, summoned with the ease of a seasoned sociopath, spilled over her heavily contoured cheeks. "Sydney, sweetie," Beverly cried out, her voice cracking with a perfectly calculated pitch of manufactured hysteria. She clasped her hands together in a begging motion, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. We did not know. I swear to you on my life, we had absolutely no idea what he was doing to you. It was the stress of the startup. It blinded him. And that awful woman Tristan's mistress, she poisoned his mind. She manipulated my poor boy against you. Please, you have to find it in your heart to forgive us. We are family. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her performance was almost breathtaking. The elite crowd of billionaires and investors, already thoroughly captivated by the unfolding corporate slaughter, watched in hushed, morbid fascination as Beverly attempted to manipulate the very woman her son had abused. I looked down at Beverly from the crystal podium, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, icy disgust. The woman who had sneered at my clothes, mocked my background, and actively encouraged her son to treat me like disposable garbage, was now weeping at my feet, desperately invoking the sacred concept of family to save her own skin. I calmly reached beneath the lip of the crystal podium and retrieved a sleek leather folder my security team had prepared for this exact moment. I flipped it open, the crisp sound of the heavy paper echoing sharply in the microphone. I do not have a family consisting of parasites, I stated smoothly, my voice devoid of any warmth or mercy. I pulled out a stack of glossy, high-resolution printouts and held them up for the cameras and the crowd to see. You blame Tristan's mistress for poisoning his mind, Beverly. But I seem to recall you being the one who actively poisoned my professional reputation. Beverly's fake tears instantly stopped falling. Her hands dropped slowly to her sides, her eyes locking onto the papers in my hand with sudden stark terror. I have here the verified IP address logs from the anonymous server farm used to launch the coordinated online smear campaign against my art restoration business last month. I announced, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the grand ballroom. The cybersecurity firm Olympus Holdings employs traced those digital attacks directly to the private network of your suburban estate. I dropped the logs onto the podium and pulled out a second stack of papers, these ones stamped with the neon logos of seedy storefronts. Furthermore, I have the certified pawn shop receipts detailing exactly how you have been maintaining the illusion of your wealth for the past 6 months. You secretly fenced every single heirloom from your late husband's estate, and when you ran out of those, you stole and pawned the vintage restoration equipment from my studio. A collective murmur of revulsion swept through the high society crowd. Stealing from a daughter-in-law to fund a fake lifestyle was a social crime that carried a permanent, irreversible stigma. Beverly opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another frantic lie, but the words died in her throat under the crushing weight of the undeniable documented proof. You aren't family, Beverly, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet register that cut through the ballroom like a surgical blade. You are a liability. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sharp, cracking sound echoed off the frescoed ceilings. Instantly, 2 massive security guards from my elite personal detail stepped forward from the shadows flanking the stage. They moved with terrifying synchronized speed, descending the marble steps and flanking Beverly on either side. Their imposing muscular frames completely boxed her in their expressions, hidden behind dark, tactical sunglasses. Beverly shrank back, her breath hitching in genuine, unfiltered panic as the physical intimidation of the guards shattered her remaining bravado. She looked wildly left and right, but the wall of broad shoulders offered no escape. By the way, I said coldly, leaning slightly over the crystal podium to look directly into her terrified, trembling face. The exclusive Fifth Avenue jeweler you rented those diamonds from for tonight's gala, Olympus Holdings, just acquired their entire parent company late yesterday afternoon. Beverly gasped, her hands flying instinctively to the heavy glittering stones resting against her collarbone. Take them off, I commanded, the authority in my voice, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Now. Beverly shook her head, tears of genuine agonizing humiliation finally spilling down her cheeks. Please, she whispered, her voice a ragged, broken plea. Not in front of everyone. The 2 security guards stepped half a pace closer, their physical proximity a silent, undeniable threat. Trembling uncontrollably, Beverly reached behind her neck. Her manicured fingers fumbled blindly with the intricate clasp of the diamond necklace. The assembled billionaires immediately began to laugh at her ultimate public humiliation. The heavy diamond necklace fell from Beverly's trembling fingers, hitting the pristine marble floor with a dull, heavy thud. She quickly fumbled with her earlobes, unfastening the matching diamond earrings and dropping them beside the necklace. The mocking laughter of the assembled billionaires echoed mercilessly around her, sealing her absolute social destruction. She sank to her knees next to the sparkling pile of rented jewels, burying her face in her hands. The Blackwood family matriarch was finally reduced to the pathetic groveling fraud she had always truly been. But the spectacular implosion of Beverly was instantly eclipsed by a sudden violent commotion at the rear of the grand ballroom. The crowd whipped around as the heavy oak doors rattled. The four imposing men in the FBI windbreakers marched forward forcefully, escorting Jamal down the center aisle and directly back into the searing, unforgiving light of the main event. Jamal stumbled, his polished dress shoes slipping on the marble as the federal agents pushed him toward the front of the stage. The sheer, overwhelming totality of his absolute ruin crashed over him like a suffocating tidal wave. He looked at Beverly weeping on the floor without her rented diamonds. He looked at Tristan cowering beneath the terrifying, unyielding gaze of Vincent Blackwood. In that singular, crystal-clear moment, Jamal experienced a catastrophic psychological break. He realized with brutal, agonizing clarity exactly what he had sacrificed. He had spent 15 grueling years building a spotless, stellar career in Manhattan high finance. He had earned highly coveted licenses, amassed a pristine portfolio of elite clients, and secured a lucrative partnership at a top-tier wealth management firm. He had possessed real earned success, and he had thrown every single piece of it straight into a blazing fire to cover for Tristan. He had risked federal prison and completely immolated his entire professional existence just to enable a privileged, arrogant idiot who could not even code a functioning software program. The profound, sickening injustice of his own monumental stupidity shattered Jamal's fragile restraint. A primal, furious roar tore from his throat, startling the elite investors standing nearby. He violently wrenched his shoulder, breaking free from the lead FBI agent's momentary grip. Jamal lunged forward with the terrifying, frantic speed of a cornered predator. He bypassed the shattered champagne glass and threw himself directly onto Tristan. His hands curled into tight, ruthless fists, grabbing Tristan by the lapels of his ruined designer tuxedo. He yanked the pathetic, sobbing man off the marble floor, shaking him with a sudden, explosive surge of adrenaline-fueled rage. "You ruined my life!" Jamal screamed, his voice shredding his vocal cords and echoing violently through the cavernous ballroom. Spittle flew from his lips, landing on Tristan's terrified, tear-streaked face. "I told you we could not fake the audit. I told you Olympus Holdings would verify the offshore accounts. You arrogant, stupid parasite. You destroyed everything I built." Tristan shrieked, a high-pitched, cowardly sound, flailing his arms weakly as Jamal slammed him back down against the hard marble steps. The assembled billionaires watched in morbid fascination as the supposed tech genius was brutally manhandled by his own brother-in-law. The polished facade of their high society alliance had degenerated into a vicious, feral brawl on the floor of the most exclusive gala in the city. The moment of violent retribution was fleeting. The FBI agents swiftly descended upon the chaos, moving with disciplined, overwhelming force. Two agents grabbed Jamal by the shoulders, prying his white-knuckled fingers off Tristan's ruined tuxedo. They dragged the furious wealth manager backward, effortlessly subduing him, despite his frantic, enraged thrashing. Tristan scrambled backward like a frightened crab, hyperventilating and clutching his chest as he desperately tried to put distance between himself and Jamal. "You are under arrest," the lead FBI agent announced, his authoritative voice easily cutting through the panicked gasps of the surrounding crowd. He forced Jamal's arms behind his back, securing his wrists. "You are being charged with severe corporate embezzlement, federal wire fraud, and extensive money laundering through illegal Cayman Island offshore accounts." The specific, devastating charges hung in the opulent air, confirming the absolute severity of the financial crimes. The investors who had previously considered funding Zenith now looked at Jamal as if he were carrying a highly contagious plague. The mention of illegal Cayman accounts signaled that the federal investigation was deep, thorough, and completely inescapable. Jamal was not just looking at a fine, he was looking at a decade behind bars, The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked sharply, locking around Jamal's wrists with a terrifying permanent finality. The metallic sound seemed to instantly drain the blinding rage out of him, replacing it with a hollow, suffocating dread. His chest heaved as he stood there, flanked by federal agents facing the absolute end of his freedom. Slowly, Jamal turned his head. His eyes sought out his wife. Monica was standing a few feet away, her expensive gown trembling as she sobbed hysterically into her manicured hands. She was not crying for him. She was crying for the loss of her social status, her impending bankruptcy, and the sudden brutal reality of facing the world without his substantial income shielding her. Looking at Monica's tear-streaked, selfish face, Jamal finally saw her for what she truly was. She was an exact replica of Beverly and Tristan. She was a toxic, shallow parasite who only valued him for what he could provide. He realized with a crushing sense of profound sorrow that marrying into this malicious family was the single greatest mistake of his entire life. Jamal stared at his weeping wife, feeling absolutely zero comfort or connection. The federal agents gripped his biceps, preparing to march him out of the grand ballroom and into a waiting squad car. He locked his weary eyes with Monica one final time. "Do not ever wait for me." Jamal spit out his cold voice, dripping with absolute, utterly freezing contempt. The harsh, unforgiving echo of Jamal's final words hung in the stale air of the ballroom. Monica crumpled completely, the last remaining threads of her carefully constructed sanity unraveling. She fell to her knees, the expensive silk of her designer gown pooling around her like a deflating parachute. She reached out a trembling hand toward the retreating backs of the federal agents, but her husband did not look back. He was gone, and with him went her entire identity. The realization hit her with the brute force of a physical blow. She possessed no personal wealth, no marketable skills, and absolutely no assets in her own name. The luxury cars, the sprawling estate, the platinum credit cards she wielded like weapons were all tied directly to Jamal. She was instantly destitute. Monica looked wildly around the room, her tear-streaked face searching the crowd for a single sympathetic gaze. She found none. The elite socialites she had spent years desperately trying to impress were now actively turning their backs, whispering behind crystal champagne flutes, treating her like a toxic contagion. Her social status was utterly obliterated in less than 60 seconds. She was left sobbing on the cold marble floor, a pathetic abandoned footnote to her own family's catastrophic downfall. The violent focus of the room immediately shifted back to the center of the disaster. The remaining two FBI agents moved with swift, tactical precision toward Tristan. The disgraced tech CEO was still paralyzed, curled into a miserable ball near his weeping mother. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," the taller agent barked, gripping Tristan by the collar of his ruined tuxedo and hauling him roughly to his feet. Tristan offered no physical resistance. His legs trembled so violently they could barely support his weight. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom, a sound that finally shattered his shock. Tristan broke down into a hysterical, blubbering mess. His chest heaved with frantic, gasping sobs, as the stark reality of federal prison materialized before his eyes. He thrashed his head around his panicked gaze, darting past the federal agents, past his father-in-law, until it locked directly onto me. "Sydney, please!" Tristan wailed, his voice cracking into a high, desperate shriek that made the nearby investors flinch in disgust. He strained against the unyielding grip of the federal agents, leaning his body toward the podium. "I am begging you. You have to stop this. You are a Blackwood. You have so much money. Billions of dollars. Just pay the debt. Pay Olympus Holdings. We can fix this mess right now. I will do whatever you want. I will sign the company over to you. Just write the check and we can start over. Please, Sydney, I love you." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his plea hung in the air, so incredibly pathetic that it bordered on the absurd. He had spent months mocking my profession, degrading my intelligence, and flaunting his unearned superiority. He had cheated on me, actively plotted to leave me with nothing, and allowed his family to treat me like a worthless servant. And now, facing the terrifying abyss of his own making, he was demanding I use my generational wealth to bail him out. I stood at the crystal podium, letting the heavy, judgmental silence of the ballroom amplify his pathetic groveling. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I simply closed my presentation folder, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and stepped out from behind the podium. The sea of billionaires and industry titans parted seamlessly as I began to walk slowly down the grand marble steps. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, but I only looked at Tristan. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, a steady, measured tempo that matched the beating of my own calm heart. I reached the bottom of the staircase and glided across the floor, stopping just inches away from where the federal agents held him. Tristan looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot tears streaming freely down his flushed cheeks. He was hyperventilating, waiting for a savior that would never arrive. I looked down at him, observing the total ruin of the man who had constantly called me a useless burden. "I am not a failure, Tristan," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling clarity across the hushed ballroom. "But you are about to be a federal inmate." Tristan's jaw dropped, a fresh sob tearing from his throat, as the last spark of his delusional hope was permanently extinguished. He slumped forward in the agent's grip, completely broken. Without breaking eye contact, I smoothly unclasped my small, elegant clutch. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, folded legal document. The paper was crisp and heavy, bearing the unmistakable embossed seal of my father's elite legal team. They had worked with ruthless, unprecedented speed to finalize the paperwork the very moment the fraudulent audit was confirmed. I held the document up for a brief second, ensuring the flashing cameras of the financial press captured the moment perfectly. I dropped the finalized, fully executed divorce papers directly onto Tristan's chest. The heavy packet struck his ruined tuxedo shirt and slid down to the marble floor, landing right beside the shattered remains of his champagne glass. The lead FBI agent gave a single curt nod to his partner. "Move him out," he ordered. The agents yanked Tristan backward, dragging his limp, sobbing body away from me and toward the exit. The heavy oak double doors swung violently open, revealing the bright, flashing red and blue lights of the armored federal vehicles waiting in the cool Manhattan night. I stood perfectly composed in the center of the grand ballroom, flanked by my father and the silent, staring elite, absolutely satisfied as I watched the miserable garbage finally take itself out into the cold. The harsh, unforgiving echo of Jamal's final words hung heavy in the stale air of the ballroom. Monica crumpled completely, the last remaining threads of her carefully constructed sanity unraveling. She fell to her knees, the expensive silk of her designer gown pooling around her like a deflating parachute. She reached out a trembling hand toward the retreating backs of the federal agents, but her husband did not look back. He was gone, and with him went her entire identity. The realization hit her with the brute force of a physical blow. She possessed no personal wealth, no marketable skills, and absolutely no assets in her own name. The luxury cars, the sprawling estate, the platinum credit cards she wielded like weapons were all tied directly to Jamal. She was instantly destitute. Monica looked wildly around the room, her tearful face searching the crowd for a single sympathetic gaze. She found none. The elite socialites she had spent years desperately trying to impress were now actively turning their backs, whispering behind crystal champagne flutes, treating her like a toxic contagion. Her social status was utterly obliterated in less than 60 seconds. She was left sobbing on the cold marble floor, a pathetic, abandoned footnote to her own family's catastrophic downfall. The violent focus of the room immediately shifted back to the center of the disaster. The remaining two FBI agents moved with swift, tactical precision toward Tristan. The disgraced tech CEO was still paralyzed, curled into a miserable ball near his weeping mother. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," the taller agent barked, gripping Tristan by the collar of his ruined tuxedo and hauling him roughly to his feet. Tristan offered no physical resistance. His legs trembled so violently they could barely support his weight. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom, a sound that finally shattered his shock. Tristan broke down into a hysterical, blubbering mess. His chest heaved with frantic, gasping sobs as the stark reality of federal prison materialized before his eyes. He thrashed his head around his panicked gaze, darting past the federal agents, past the imposing Vincent Blackwood, until it locked directly onto me. "Sydney, please!" Tristan wailed, his voice cracking into a high, desperate shriek that made the nearby investors flinch in disgust. He strained against the unyielding grip of the federal agents, leaning his body toward the podium. "I am begging you. You have to stop this. You are a Blackwood. You have so much money, billions of dollars. Just pay the debt. Pay Olympus Holdings. We can fix this mess right now. I will do whatever you want. I will sign the company over to you. Just write the check and we can start over. Please, Sydney, I love you." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his plea hung in the air, so incredibly pathetic that it bordered on the absurd. He had spent months mocking my profession, degrading my intelligence, and flaunting his unearned superiority. He had cheated on me, actively plotted to leave me with nothing, and allowed his family to treat me like a worthless servant. And now, facing the terrifying abyss of his own making, he was demanding I use my generational wealth to bail him out. I stood at the crystal podium, letting the heavy, judgmental silence of the ballroom amplify his pathetic groveling. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I simply closed my presentation folder, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and stepped out from behind the podium. The sea of billionaires and industry titans parted seamlessly as I began to walk slowly down the grand marble steps. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, but I only looked at Tristan. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, a steady, measured tempo that matched the beating of my own calm heart. I reached the bottom of the staircase and glided across the floor, stopping just inches away from where the federal agents held him. Tristan looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot tears streaming freely down his flushed cheeks. He was hyperventilating, waiting for a savior that would never arrive. I looked down at him, observing the total ruin of the man who had constantly called me a useless burden. "I am not a failure, Tristan," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling clarity across the hushed ballroom. "But you are about to be a federal inmate." Tristan's jaw dropped, a fresh sob tearing from his throat as the last spark of his delusional hope was permanently extinguished. He slumped forward in the agent's grip, completely broken. Without breaking eye contact, I smoothly unclasped my small, elegant clutch. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, folded legal document. The paper was crisp and heavy, bearing the unmistakable embossed seal of my father's elite legal team. They had worked with ruthless, unprecedented speed to finalize the paperwork the very moment the fraudulent audit was confirmed. I held the document up for a brief second, ensuring the flashing cameras of the financial press captured the moment perfectly. I dropped the finalized, fully executed divorce papers directly onto Tristan's chest. The heavy packet struck his ruined tuxedo shirt and slid down to the marble floor, landing right beside the shattered remains of his champagne glass. The lead FBI agent gave a single curt nod to his partner. "Move him out," he ordered. The agents yanked Tristan backward, dragging his limp, sobbing body away from me and toward the exit. The heavy oak double doors swung violently open, revealing the bright, flashing red and blue lights of the armored federal vehicles waiting in the cool Manhattan night. I stood perfectly composed in the center of the grand ballroom, flanked by my father and the silent, staring elite, absolutely satisfied as I watched the miserable garbage finally take itself out into the cold.